Hello, and welcome to Rough Edges. I'm your host, Sarah Fox. In this podcast, I will guide you through my faith and mental health journey to dispel the stigma surrounding mental illness and to create a voice for those who wish to discover more about these topics. This podcast will not only shed light on mental health issues, but will also reveal the intersection between faith and mental illness. I pray that these themes will bring growth and healing to our communities. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Rough Edges. Today, I am joined by special guest, Nicole Laurent. Nicole is a seasoned psychotherapist with an understanding of mental health and neurological disorders who uses counseling to help people make lifestyle and nutrition changes to their conditions. She also uses ketogenic dietary therapy as a treatment for mental illness and neurological issues. She uses a variety of nutritional and functional methods of treatment in her work to provide evidence-based psychotherapy modalities in adult client populations. She completed her Bachelor's of the Arts in Psychology and Master's of the Arts in Clinical Psychology from Argosy University in 2007. Over the years, she has worked with a variety of groups and have enjoyed tremendous success assisting clients in the resolution of a variety of struggles. If you want to learn more about Nicole, you can visit her website at mentalhealthketo.com. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. So, Nicole, tell me a little bit more about yourself. What are 3 things that you are most passionate about and why?
Oh, let's see. I'm a mental health counselor, and I've been so for about 15 years. And 3 things I am passionate about. So I am passionate about using nutritional therapies to help people with different struggles, mental illness, neurological disorders. So I'm really passionate about that because I see the results I get from that, and that has just made me excited about doing psychotherapy again and all the good stuff. I am passionate about my cat. I love my cat. She just moved off my lap because I was talking too loud and she wants to nap. And she's my co-therapist in life. And then I also love to CrossFit. I like physical fitness. So yeah, I guess those are 3 things I'm passionate about right now.
Nice. That is amazing. And I also have a cat. His name is Felix. So shout out to Felix. And I just love him so much. And so I definitely get the cat love.
Good.
So you are a psychotherapist who specializes in like ketogenic like therapy. And so could you explain what that is and what your work entails?
Right. So I've been I've been a counselor for a long time, and I use a lot of evidence-based or what's considered evidence-based treatments for things. So I have a lot of experience in dialectical behavior therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, EMDR, behavioral therapy, all the therapies, right? Well, not all of them, but my niche of what I like to work with. And I started to, it's hard because people, therapy is hard work, or at least the kind of therapy that I do with people is hard work. There's worksheets, and we're doing Socratic reasoning, and we are trying to do mindfulness, and it is active and it is hard. And over the years, I would see people who were struggling really have difficulty using them, or could only use those therapies up to a certain point, or whatever, which is totally fine. But then I kind of had my own big health transformation using a ketogenic diet, and I felt a lot better. My brain worked a lot better. I was able to be more present. I really upped my therapy game in my work. Like I realized my brain works better. I'm doing better work now. This is exciting. And then, I started to think about, well, what if in addition to medication or in replacement of medication for some of my clients, if they focused on the nutritional piece, right? And maybe their brains would work better too, and maybe they would get more out of therapy, because they could be present and have more brain energy for that. Like, people who have depression and anxiety, they don't got a lot of brain space or energy for all the things that therapy kind of requires and needs. And, the other thing I was noticing is that sometimes people, I have nothing against medications for sure, but they would go on medications and it would kind of blunt their emotional affect a little bit. They would get a little bit of that sense of, whatever was going on in their life that wasn't working for them, they suddenly just kind of stuck with it, and they were okay to keep going. And therapy's about change, and so I got excited about that. And so what I do is it kind of runs the spectrum from helping clients. Early on they'll say, oh, I ate a bunch of super processed foods and I kind of don't feel good now, or I got a tummy ache, or my energy is low. And I'm like, oh, tell me about that. Tell me about what you ate and how it has a direct effect on your mental health and how you felt the next day. Well, maybe we should do something about that, right? Like maybe we should explore that. So it starts from there all the way into, they say, Nicole, my brain doesn't work. I cannot remember things. I think I have mild cognitive impairment. I might have early dementia. Or, Nicole, I have brain fog because I have an autoimmune disorder, or, these different things. And I'm like, okay, well, let's go all the way to let's go hardcore here, so to speak. And let's give you some ketones for brain fuel. And let's change your whole diet around that in order to kind of rescue your cognitive function. So ketogenic diets are fascinating. I could talk all day about them, but the gist of it is that in our current food climate of what's available and what's handy and what we're like kind of wired to like to eat, right? People's main fuel source is carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are fine if you are an insulin sensitive individual, meaning your hormones are happy and you can handle all that blood sugar that comes from carbohydrates. But most of us have been eating really high carbohydrates since we were little, right? And so our hormonal health is not so great anymore. Our ability to clear that blood sugar out of the system has been impaired. And for some people, they experience that in their body with weight gain or whatever, or just not feeling well. But it also will affect like that insulin. Insulin is like the master hormone, and it will affect your sex hormones. It will give you, terrible cycles. It will mess with your thyroid function. So, there's all these kind of cascade effects to having that particular hormone not be working quite right in our bodies, or our cells' ability to utilize it properly, which actually ends up becoming impaired, and that's called insulin resistance. And so what ketogenic diets do is they turn on an already existing machinery in your body that is perfectly capable and happy of not having dietary carbohydrates, and switching that fuel to a fat source, healthy fat sources. And your body will actually break those healthy fat sources down into these itty-bitty ketones. And these ketones can act as a fuel, but they're also these kind of really miraculous little genetic signaling molecules where they talk to the body. They're like, okay, everything's changed, the environment is different, and they will go through these different genetic pathways and turn some really beneficial things on and turn down some really negative things that we know, like inflammation and stuff like that. So I kind of see them as like, a medical, they're very much a medical intervention to me. And I encourage patients to try them. I think everybody who has a brain should get the experience of feeling what it feels like to run them on ketones, maybe for a couple, 2-3 months in their life, just to see if they feel better and if they like it. And so, yeah, that's what I do.
Wow, that is incredible. Just the science behind all of it is just so fascinating. Like, it's interesting to get into.
Mm-hmm.
So, what specifically made you want to pursue this type of career?
Yeah. So what? Oh, as a therapist, or specifically using ketogenic diets with clients? Which one?
As a therapist.
As a therapist. So as a therapist, so I was a little late to the game. I was one of those people who could not quite figure out what I wanted to do in life. And I was on my second pregnancy, my second child, with my husband, and I was in a software project management program, and it got to the point where I would actually have to write code. And I realized, I just do not want to do that. I don't care how much money I can make as a project manager. I have no interest in that. And I just happened to look down at all the things I was reading for pleasure, and they were all about relationships. And I was like, maybe I need to go into psychology. So I worked on a bachelor's in psychology and realized, this is my thing. And then I was off and running.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So my next question would be getting into the nutritional aspects of your job. What would you say to somebody who is wanting to discover more about this but doesn't know where to start?
Yeah, it's really, it's really difficult. So, and the reason I feel like it's really difficult, and I think part of why I am trying to just go on every podcast I can, and I'm trying to blog, and I'm trying to do all the things, is that it's really hard for people because there is so much information out there that is not based on actual human biochemistry. There is so much information out there that is about corporations and big food, and even I know this sounds like a conspiracy theory. I know it does, but it's not. I promise. The dietary guidelines are of the United States, where they tell people this is what you eat to be healthy. This is the pyramid, right? This is what you should pick from. This many of these, and that is very industry influenced. And it is not necessarily influenced by our current population. So that pyramid is for people who are metabolically healthy and insulin sensitive. And I can't remember the exact, I think they just did a really big study about this. Only about 12% of Americans are what we would consider fully metabolically healthy and able to use that pyramid, those guidelines, in such a way that doesn't increase the potential for chronic disease. And there's this whole political thing going on where there's groups that are like, hey, people can't eat like this. They're sick. They've got diabetes. They've got mental health issues. Like, they're sick. You got to change these guidelines. And we've got big food. Like, well, no, they can have healthy whole grains, right? And for some people, those healthy whole grains are not what they need or what they want, because their body's just turning that into glucose, and it's adding to that insulin resistance. So I feel so bad for people because, and I mean, this was me too. I've always kind of trying to been healthy, and picking my foods and stuff. And that's part of why I got, a really bad chronic illness that I later had to use keto to fix it, But so people try really hard. I think they do. And they it's really hard to get information around that. But usually the best way to kind of learn more is to do your own research. Like, our health, we gotta really do our own research, and we really gotta dig deep, and we gotta be curious, and we have to understand that we have a user's manual, and we've got to figure out what our user's manual is for us, because everyone's pretty individual. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I think it more answered your question. Like, if you're trying hard and you're not finding things that work, it's not because you aren't trying. It's just because there's a lot of conflicting information out there, and beginning to do some research, and also listening to other people's experiences also. Like sometimes if you go on Reddit or you go on Facebook, and hearing what works for others, like being open to those anecdotal things is actually, I think, okay, because it spikes your curiosity. So there, I would, because I'm going to guess that your listeners are representative of the population in the U.S., and that probably only 12% of them are completely metabolically healthy. And so if they really wanted to learn more about nutrition in such a way that takes that into consideration, I would look for a low-carb nutritionist. I would look for a low-carb doctor. They have different types of provider directories that you can look up. And I would start delving into low carb under the assumption that there is likely some metabolic marker in your body that is not quite healthy anymore because of how our food supply is given to us and provided to us. That's what I would start with.
Right. Okay. That sounds like a great place to start, especially if you're like me who loves the carbohydrates and is just like trying to be healthy, but nothing's really working. And so, thank you for that. And I would like to ask about mental fitness and how it connects to someone's nutritional patterns, because I see that there is a connection between the two, because it's like your mental fitness is like, it's really just a mind thing where it's just like, if you get into the right mindset, I believe that you can make like small changes and kind of integrate into having a healthier lifestyle. So can you kind of explain like what the connection is between the mind and the body in terms of like getting into a healthier lifestyle?
Yeah. So what I see currently with clients is they really don't have a lot of mental energy and their neurotransmitters are imbalanced. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces. We could all go into that, but that's kind of the gist of it. So the idea of cooking healthy foods and doing meal prep, when you don't have enough brain energy, you get very easily overwhelmed and you take the path of least resistance, and that is probably getting food delivered or something, a snack in the cupboard, right? That's got a processed food, ultra processed food flavor to it, right? And so the environment is really, really important, and yes, mindset is really, really important. But I find that if we can make just some really small changes around, like for 2 weeks, I'm going to do this thing that's going to improve my brain energy and help balance my neurotransmitters, they have a much better chance of kind of doing the things that they need to do to kind of get that resiliency up. Like when your brain chemistry is off, it is really hard to not be easily overwhelmed. It is really hard to do therapy homework. It is really hard to do those things. And so when we start to reduce, even it could be something small, like you said, doing something small, like saying, I am only going to, I'm not going to buy any ultra processed food this week. And when I crave it, this is what the thing that I'm going to have a sweet potato instead, right? This week. Something kind of small, that sort of way. But I think that is the beginning of getting your brain chemistry right so that you can be resilient. And I think that's part of why I like the nutrition aspect and the ketogenic diets so well, is because I see this neurotransmitter balancing that happens. So let's kind of talk, is it okay to talk about that for just a moment?
Yeah, sure.
That piece? Yeah. So, here's what happens is that when you eat a diet that's really higher in carbohydrates than your metabolic health can handle, right? I'm not demonizing carbs in any way. If you are metabolically healthy and you can absorb that energy and use it, go to CrossFit, pet your cat, right? That's great. But most of us can't. So I'm going to talk about the most of us part. When you have too much blood sugar in your body and your insulin cannot push that energy into cells, what that does is it increases inflammation. So your body does not like excess blood sugar in it. Mm-hmm. It has storage areas for glucose in the muscles and a little bit in the liver, a little bit in the kidneys. And there are little parts of your brain that do rely on glucose. They're those fast-firing parts, right? They need glucose. But you don't need any dietary glucose. You can make all the glucose that your brain needs through a process in the liver called gluconeogenesis. And so dietary carbohydrates, if we're eating a lot of them because we think they're fueling our body has to work really hard to get that sugar out of the bloodstream, because that sugar in the bloodstream causes inflammation. It's why people who have diabetes have such chronic systemic damage to their bodies. It's why they get neuropathy. It's why, they have to get amputations because the inflammation has caused so much problem. It's, all those awful things, right? It's why they have a higher risk for depression and anxiety. Your body only wants 1 teaspoon worth of glucose in your bloodstream at any time.
Oh, wow.
1 teaspoon. And it pushes what it can out of your bloodstream as fast as it can into those storage areas and or tries to burn it for energy if it can, if you're insulin sensitive enough. So the longer that blood sugar is hanging out, the more inflammation that causes and the more neuroinflammation that causes. And when your brain is inflamed and stressed out from being in the sugar bath that it eventually will not be able to use for fuel well, right? Mm-hmm. It disrupts the environment in which your body is trying to make neurotransmitters. And you will literally, you turn amino acids into neurotransmitters, and it will I think it's accidental. It might be your brain's way of calling the alarm, but it will make more of a particular excitatory neurotransmitter called glutamate. Now, in a brain that's not on fire with inflammation, that some of that glutamate will be made into a happy inhibitory neurotransmitter known as GABA, right? Oh. GABA is this feel good, I got this neurotransmitter, bring it on world, sure, I'll make dinner, I got time. It's that neurotransmitter, okay?
Okay.
And glutamate is not that neurotransmitter. Glutamate is excitatory. Glutamate is the freak out neurotransmitter. It is the anxious. It is the I can't do this anymore. This is an emergency. My life is out of control. Panic disorder has high amounts of glutamate, right? And it makes up to 100 times more glutamate than it's supposed to, which then compounds the problem because glutamate levels at that high of a dose of an amount are neurotoxic and create neurodegeneration. And that then increases oxidative stress, which uses up your micronutrients that you need to fight the inflammation. You see where I'm going?
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that resiliency and mindset and all that great stuff is very much dependent upon us doing the things that we need to do in order to give our brain what it needs to function.
Right.
And that means nice high doses of micronutrients and healthy digestion so we can break down our protein into amino acids and make lots of neurotransmitters and repair our cells. And keeping that blood sugar down and keeping that inflammation down. And what I see in my practice is that when we do those things, it is so much easier to get into a better mindset. It is so much easier to get off the couch. It is so much better to do the small things, the small changes behaviorally that you need to do to climb back out of the hole, whatever hole you're struggling in, right? It's a climb. You can start to make that climb. And so that's why I get really excited about what I do.
Wow, that excites me too. Just hearing all the little pieces that connect, like, within the body. It's just so fascinating. It's just like how many layers this has, and like how different things can affect the brain, and like different parts of your nutrition can like have that effect on your entire body. So it's just amazing to hear, like, just the science behind all of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah, it is. So I wanted to ask you, because for me, I'm an emotional eater. So I get into the bad habit of like eating when I'm depressed, and usually the things that I eat are just like a whole lot of junk food, or like, sugary snacks and all that. So
Mm-hmm.
what advice do you have for somebody who is an emotional eater, who binge eats a lot and is trying to change that? Like, what kind of advice do you have for that person?
Right. So it's really kind of interesting. So there's two parts to this. Um, one is the characteristics of ultra processed foods and their effects on the brain. And the other piece is how we currently treat eating disorders. And I'm not saying you have an eating disorder, but binge, like some people would call that binge or binge eating, right? Type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we should talk about how those are currently treated in psychology, and the disconnect between that and biochemistry, and kind of what we're seeing with ketogenic diets. So first of all, I have, not here, but somewhere in my house, I have literally a medical textbook that has been written and that is used in MD education, probably not at all the schools, although that would be fantastic, that talk about how the addictive properties of processed foods,
Mm-hmm.
literally addictive properties. So back in the day, I think when I was little, probably in the 70s, the tobacco industry knew that it was starting to be toast. They knew there was lawsuits coming. They knew they were in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
All that kind of went down, and those executives went into big food, and they literally have created processed foods that hijack your brain. And as soon as you eat them, you want more and you crave more, and it makes normal food not taste as good in comparison. And they have literally tried to figure out ways to make these substances, they're not food, more addictive. And so the very first advice that I give people who ask me that kind of question is we got to change your definition of what you consider food. Food is to nourish us and to give us the building blocks that we need in order to feel good and to thrive, right? And to repair. That is not what these are. These should not be called food. And those executives give absolute zero care about your well-being and your health. They do not care at all about nourishing you. They very much want to exploit you at your weakest emotional state. And if you're not in a weakest emotional state, they would still like you to try their product so that they have a better chance of making a profit. They give zero care about you. And when you reach for one of those products off the shelf, you want to change your mindset about what that means. And for me, when I go to the grocery store and I only shop on the outer edges, right, and I stay away from those middle aisles with those processed foods,
Yep.
it is an act of defiance. It is an act of you have tried to put a system in place to exploit me and to bring me down and to change my brain chemistry in such a way that I don't live my very best life. And why would I help you with that endeavor? Why would I assist you in exploiting me? Of course I wouldn't, right? And so, every time I go to the store and I don't buy those products, I win. I don't let someone bring me down. And so we change our viewpoint about what that looks like. right? We change our viewpoint about what is food and how am I going to nourish myself, and why would I make someone rich exploiting me, right?
Right.
So we get mad about it. We talk about it. We get mad about it. We talk about, and like, don't even get me started on the whole lower SES, how we exploit them by trying to feed them cheap food that's not food, that destroys their health, right? And why we allow that, and why is our government allowing that, and why not give people real food and access to incomes where they can afford real healthy food, and not call things food that aren't food. Like, it's just it's like substance, right? And so that's the first thing. Like, there is real research showing that these are substances and not food. And it is driven by profit. And so there's that piece. And then what was the other one I said? And then there's a disconnect between psychology and human biochemistry that's kind of going on in the field. And the reason I say that is that, if you went to an eating disorder specialist, although there's different types nowadays, just like the nutritionist, right? They're kind of starting to become kind of two camps, where one's like, I'm going to look at the biochemistry and be open to this, and the other one's like, I'm gonna keep on with what we've been doing. And quite frankly, I don't think that's working. This one is not working. They're doing what we're doing. We have a lot of people struggling, and it is that camp that is saying never restrict, never exclude. Anything you can put in your mouth, it should be called food, right? And if you tell someone don't eat this, well, they're going to get in their head and feel denied, and then not be able to make good choices, or they're going to turn into an anorexic or whatever, right? That's that. And I'm trained in that. Like, I know that model. And then there is the one that pays attention to biochemistry, which is if ultra-processed foods are an addictive substance that increases cravings in someone who has binge eating, perhaps it's okay to tell them that they should avoid ultra-processed food, right? Maybe that's not crazy talk, right? And let's pay attention to what happens in the brain with certain substances like high sugar. Like, there's a huge dopamine response. It's quite a bit like cocaine in there, right? And maybe we talk about that, and maybe we do things biochemically in such a way that their cravings reduce and they feel like they can make good decisions about what they put in their body. And I will tell you that, and when I'm in a lot of little Facebook groups for therapists and stuff, and it is contentious and ugly. Like, I don't dare say this part, because they're like, you're going to kill someone, you're going to give someone an eating disorder, etc., etc.
Oh, wow.
And is ugly in there, and that's okay. All fields have their debates, but there is a lot of eating disorder specialists that are recommending low carbohydrate or ketogenic diets for people who have binge eating disorder, specifically, not anorexia. That's a very different eating disorder, but it's being used for bulimia and binge eating disorder. And there are at least 3 case studies published in peer-reviewed journals, and there is actually a randomized that are very successful, where one of the people in the case study I remember reading was binging minimum twice a week. Went from twice a week binges, it might have been twice a day, I can't remember, but it was very severe. She was very severe. It's probably twice a day, but even twice a week is very hard. I'm misremembering that perfectly, so forgive me. But she went from that to 0 binges per week, and she kept it up 6 months later, because the urge to binge goes down when you switch your fuel sources.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. And there's actual randomized controlled trials going on right now using ketogenic diets for binge eating disorder. And so they don't do randomized controlled trials unless the research leading up to it is good. They don't do randomized controlled trials unless they can make a case for the biochemistry underlying the mechanism of change, right? Potentially.
Right.
And so there's big literature reviews that happen where they look at the data and says, yes, this might be good, because our randomized controlled trials are very expensive and nobody goes out of pocket for that without a good look at the research literature.
Right.
So that's some of the stuff that we discuss when people feel like they emotionally eat. Yeah, that's what I usually say.
Okay, that sounds good, actually. Because a lot of the times it's like you said, it's just like these substances affect on the brain. It's like that's something that has to be looked at a little bit more carefully, because it's like if you're continuously like consuming these substances, it's gonna affect your brain chemistry in a certain way. So yeah, that is just very interesting. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And my last question would be, since this season is all about resilience and mental health advocacy, what does mental health advocacy mean to you?
What does mental health advocacy mean to me? Oh, that's a big one for me. So on my blog, my site tagline, I guess it's called, the thing that I put at the end of every single article that I write that outlines the science underlying ketogenic diets for mental health and the treatment of mental illness is, because you have the right to know all the ways you can feel better. That I feel very, very strongly about. We very much silo people into medication or therapy, and we tell them that is the only way to feel better. And we might tell them about meditation, but we don't push it. And we might tell them about, different kind of what are called complementary therapies. But we're told that those are complementary therapy. Like if you came to me and you were like, Nicole, I have depression. What do I do? If I say to you, oh, you need to join a yoga class and go 7 days a week and do that, they'd be like, oh, you can't do that, Nicole, as the therapist. That is not the standard of care. You have to tell her to go to medication first. And quite frankly, we are told to push medication before therapy. It is on our exams. If I were to answer that question and say, what comes first, therapy? Do we try therapy or medication first? And I put therapy, I would have failed that question.
Wow.
We are told you should always encourage clients to get medication first, right? Particularly if they're moderate to severe, right?
Yeah.
And that's not my experience. That's not my experience at all. And so I think that in my mind, mental health advocacy means that you have the right to know all the ways that you can feel better. And you have the right to know that medication is going to have side effects, that people can have withdrawal syndromes trying to get off medication. I am a firm believer in full informed consent. You have the right to know that therapy is hard, that therapy can stir your soup pot and make you feel worse. You have a right to know all the ways that getting well is going to be hard, and all the ways that getting well is going to be amazing, and all the ways that you can actually get well that have some sort of evidence base so that you can make an informed decision about how to feel better. And to me, that is mental health advocacy.
Wow, and I agree with that. Like, we do deserve to know the ways that we can feel better, like all the ways, not just, the ways that are pushed or heavily publicized in the media, or, that just creates a stigma around like therapy and medication and like all those other things. But I agree with you. Like, we definitely deserve to know all the ways in which we can feel better. Well, Nicole, I want to thank you so much for coming on Rough Edges today. Again, if you want to learn more about Nicole's work, you can visit her website at mentalhealthketo.com. And please stay tuned for more empowering episodes on Rough Edges. Thank you for listening to Rough Edges. Feel free to follow this podcast on Instagram at rough.edges.podcast or visit my blog at sarahifox.com. If you have any questions or further suggestions on how to make this podcast grow, you can email at rough.edges.podcast@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and have a wonderful day.